For generations, a powerful story has simmered beneath the surface of New Zealand. A story of promises made and broken. A story that refuses to be forgotten. This is the ongoing struggle of Maori people. A struggle that shaped the nation's history, culture, and recently has shaken the very halls of New Zealand's parliament. The issue is complex, layered, and steeped in history. Today we will confront a saga of resilience and reclamation, the ongoing struggle for Maori rights. To understand this issue, we need to go way back to 1840. Picture a different time, a time with limited communication unlike today. In 1840, the British Empire was expanding, reaching across oceans to a land they called New Zealand, a place where indigenous Maori had already lived for hundreds of years. Guided by skilled navigation, the Maori had settled there, developed a rich culture, language, and worldview which was rooted in harmony with nature and deep respect for ancestors. This worldview, known as Te Ao Maori, was core part of Maori identity. But as we know, the arrival of British wasn't just a cultural exchange. It marked the beginning of, well, let's call it a delicate negotiation for land, resources, and power. To formalize these relations, the British and Maori leaders signed an agreement, the Treaty of Waitangi. It was named after the location where it was first signed, and it was intended to be a foundational document, a promise of coexistence between the Crown and the Maori people. But here's where things get complicated. The treaty was written in two versions, one in English and one in Te Reo Maori, the Maori language. But the versions did not say the same thing. In English version, the treaty suggested that Maori would cede full sovereignty to British Crown, essentially giving the British control over the land. But in Maori version, the word sovereignty was translated as kavanatanga, which doesn't quite mean sovereignty, it means something closer to governance. So while British understood this as full authority, the Maori believed they were simply sharing governance while maintaining absolute authority over their lands, resources, and sacred possessions. This fundamental difference in understanding would become a fault line, a crack that would widen over time, leading to deep mistrust and resentment between Maori and Crown. This treaty was signed by over 500 Maori chiefs, and yet not all Maori leaders agreed, and many chiefs didn't sign at all. But in the eyes of British, they didn't really matter. They declared that treaty applied to all Maori tribes, whether they signed or not. And that assumption of authority would change Maori life forever. As British settlers poured into New Zealand in the mid-19th century, they began claiming more and more land. And this demand for land sparked one of the darkest periods in New Zealand's history, the New Zealand Wars. These conflicts erupted between Maori and British forces and resulted in violent, brutal confrontations over land ownership and sovereignty. The British government enacted laws like the New Zealand Settlement Act of 1863, which authorized them to confiscate Maori land from those they deemed rebellious. This was effectively a massive land grab justified by the claim that some Maori were not loyal to Crown. One of the most infamous events was Parihaka incident in 1881. A non-violent Maori settlement was invaded by government forces. Their soldiers destroyed homes, arrested leaders, and as reports indicate, committed atrocities. It's a dark chapter that many generations in New Zealand weren't even taught, and it remains a deeply traumatic memory in Maori history. By the end of 19th century, the Maori had lost not only their land, but their economic base, their social structure, and in many cases, their language and culture were under constant threat. Fast forward to the 20th century, by this time New Zealand's government had reimagined the story of colonization, presenting it as a harmonious partnership with Maori, while glossing over the fact that Maori were forced to assimilate and surrender vast tracts of land. But the Maori had not forgotten. In 1975, after generations of silence, New Zealand's government established the Waitangi Tribunal to investigate breaches of the treaty. At last, Maori grievances could be heard, and this wasn't just about modern issues. In 1985, the tribunal gained retrospective powers to examine historical grievances going all the way back to 1840. The Waitangi Tribunal was a landmark, a turning point that opened door for Maori tribes to negotiate the Crown for restitution, land, and financial compensation. Yet, the settlement process has been criticized by many Maori as inadequate. On average, only a fraction of the originally confiscated land was returned, and for many, the financial compensation barely covered the losses. In 2023, the ACT Party and New Zealand first proposed a treaty principles bill and a potential referendum on the principles of treaty. They argue that the New Zealanders should define these principles democratically, once and for all. They believe that everyone in New Zealand should have the same rights regardless of ethnicity or heritage. At first glance, it sounds like a call for equality. But for the Maori, it's more complicated. Many see this proposal as an attempt to weaken their treaty-based rights that are fundamental to their identity, culture and historical place in New Zealand. A referendum, they fear, could reduce Maori rights to just another yes or no, stripping them of the distinct legal status they were promised. In an emotional scene in Parliament on November 2024, Hannah Maipi Clark, a young Maori MP, led a haka, a powerful ancient Maori dance. Joined by her fellow MPs and members of public, the haka became a rallying cry, a symbol of unity and defiance. For the Maori, the haka is more than a dance, it's a spiritual expression of strength and resilience. In that moment, it was as if the generations of Maori ancestors were standing alongside them, a reminder that their legacy and rights cannot be simply erased. So where do we stand now? The Treaty of Waitangi remains, to this day, New Zealand's closest thing to a constitution. It's a living document, one that's meant to evolve as New Zealand society does. But as the debate intensifies over how to interpret or redefine this treaty, the question remains, can New Zealand honor its past while building a future of unity? In the end, the story of Treaty of Waitangi is more than a historical conflict. It's a challenge to remember, to reflect and to respect a partnership formed nearly 200 years ago.